Good morning and welcome to this morning's reflection. If you hear strange swishing noises in the background, it's probably the wind, and the wind is howling this morning. Yesterday we spoke about using Scripture to come into a much deeper and more intimate relationship with God, and it's something we all long for. And one of the ways in which we can do that is to read Scripture using the ancient way of reading, referred to as Lectio Divina. And I know that many of you know about this way of reading Scripture, but bear with me, either this will refresh your approach to Lectio Divina or will inspire you to return to it if you haven't read that way for some time. Remember that Lectio Divina, which is divine reading, is a very ancient way of reading, going back to the very early days of the Church. And it is experienced in 4 movements. We might think of them as moves rather than steps. When we're just starting out, we concentrate on following the steps and getting everything in the right order. But eventually, we become much more comfortable, and the whole process becomes more comfortable, and the moves, like a dance, flow with beauty and pleasure, heart and soul, and the moves become fluid and flow into one another quite naturally. But first, we do have to familiarize ourselves with the basic moves. To prepare for Lectio, we first choose a passage of Scripture no more than 6 to 8 verses in length, and that's very important. We begin with a time of silent preparation, in which we become quiet in God's presence and touch our desire to hear from God. This then gives us the opportunity to allow the busyness and the chaos of life to settle down until there is a quiet inner space in which we can hear from God. So, having become silent, having become still, then we read the chosen passage a number of times. Ruth Haley Barton suggests 4. Each time asking yourself a different question that invites us into the depth that God has for us in the Scripture. After each reading, there should be a period of silence. So you read it once, and then you're still. You read it a second time, and then you're still. And that's why it's important that you choose just a few verses, because if you've got something profoundly long, it doesn't work as well. The first move is to read. In this move, we read the passage once or even twice, listening for the word or the phrase that strikes us. So you've read it a number of times, asking yourselves questions that are invitational. What does this mean to me? What am I feeling about this passage? What am I noticing in this passage? And then you read it again, once or twice, and you look for the word that shimmers, the word that stands out from the rest, a word that causes a visceral reaction or brings about a deep sense of resonance or even resistance. The mood of this reading is gentle and reflective, and we have a sense of expectancy that God will speak to us. After the reading, there is a brief period of silence in which we remain with the word that has shimmered, savouring it, repeating it without trying to figure out what it means or why it was being given to us. So if the word was peace, perhaps then you would sit with that word, just letting it be present to you. The second move is to reflect. Now we read the passage a second time, and this time we reflect on the way our life is touched by this word. We might ask, what is it in my life that needed to hear this word today? If the word was peace, what is it in my life that needed to hear peace today? Or if the passage is a story, where am I in this text? And what do I experience as I allow myself to be in this story? Again, there is a brief period of silence in which we stay present with God, with whatever comes. Rather than thinking too much about the passage, and we have to be very careful here, we keep coming back to the word that we have been given. The third move is to respond. This is an invitation or a challenge for us to respond. What is our response then to God's invitation? This is the first and unedited response to what we have heard. It is the prayer that comes most naturally in response to what we have heard God say to us. And we allow it to flow freely in the moments of silence that follow. Perhaps Scripture has touched a place of pain, a place of frustration or anger, and we pour out these feelings in the safety of this moment. Perhaps there is a flash of self-knowledge, and we are convicted of some sin. In the silence, we feel our remorse and we make our confession. Perhaps we are overwhelmed by some way in which God tells us that He loves us. And in the silence, we let tears of love and gratitude flow, and we just soak in God's love. Or perhaps we hear God calling us to something new, and our heart exclaims, "You've got to be kidding." Whatever our response, we let it find full expression in the silence. And when our response has subsided, we read the passage one last time. And this time, the invitation is to rest in God. We are like the weaned child in Psalm 131 who has received what it needs from its mother and can now rest in peace and quiet. Here we rest with God and simply enjoy His presence, realizing that God is the one who will enable us to respond faithfully to whatever invitation we have heard. We resolve to carry this word with us and to live it out in our daily lives. We continue to listen to it throughout the day as we are led deeper and deeper into its meaning, and it begins to live in us. So very briefly, we begin by reading the Scripture at least 2 to 4 times, and then we read it looking for a word that shimmers. After which, we take that word and we reflect on that word, on how it works its way out into our lives. And then we have a moment of responsorial prayer as we respond to the way in which Scripture has touched us. And then we simply rest in God.